Hello and welcome to this School of Humankind free event. My name is Wyndham. I am the Blueprint Coach. Sorrel, I am joined by you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
And I am Sorrel Pindar. I'm a relationship and couples coach.
Which is the reason we are doing this event this evening. So the event this evening is titled The Problems with Relationships. And as Sorrel has said, this is her area of professional expertise. This is notionally my area of experience, having been in relationships. And I think for today, what we're not suggesting for a second that what we talk about is the whole entirety of what can cause challenges in relationships. Um, but we do have some particular perspectives that we would like to bring. And I think we both share the idea that you can't solve what you're not aware of. And the idea of offering some light into what can be a pretty dark corner sometimes may offer some help for some people to view the challenges they face in a different way. And when we view them in a different way, we're much more likely to be able to find a solution for them.
Indeed.
I'm glad you said that because otherwise we'd be diverging right at the beginning. So problems with relationships, where do you want to start, Sorrel?
Well, you can either start at the center, the couple, or you can start at the outer edges of things. And I like to start at the outer edges of things
Okay.
because what happens here is so much a product of what happens out here. So, shall I start?
Yeah, go for it. That sounds
Okay.
interesting.
So, actually, I'm going to tell you a little story. I belong to a little group of people who have all been trained in relational life therapy, which I am waiting for certification in at the very moment. I'm waiting to see if I passed.
Hmm.
And the subject of, and I can't remember why it came up, Indian couples came up. And this is public knowledge. This isn't private. Somebody said in an interview with Esther Perel, who's a big name in relationships and sex, that in
She's in my
India, if
notebook
man
to
hasn't,
reference as well.
in India, if a man has an affair, it's entirely his wife's fault. It's 100% responsibility falls on her. And it's
Hmm.
nothing to do with him, apparently. Which is like, as Terry Real, who set up this relational life thing, has said, in India, you've got patriarchy cubed. So I want to talk about patriarchy because um, patriarchy is so much a part of our culture and our social structure. And you can still see it in the boardroom, can't you? How many women are there compared to the number of men in the boardroom? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy little measure to take. Um, so going back to Terry Real, who he's been in couples therapy and family therapy for about 40 years, he's very experienced. He talks about the three rings of patriarchy. And the three rings are the first ring is what he calls the Great Divide, which is that we label certain characteristics as masculine and other characteristics as feminine, which is kind of fine up to a point. But the second ring is the dance of contempt, which is that we then say that the masculine characteristics have more value than the feminine characteristics. So it's more valuable to be high achieving and strong and pushing through than it is to be caring and nurturing, basically.
Hmm.
And the third ring is the code of silence, which is that we don't talk about it. And that's what keeps it in place. Because if you don't talk about something, it can't be challenged. So I guess
Yeah.
part of my work is to challenge these things with people I work with. Um, and the other side of that is individualism, which is that everyone is kind of thinking about their own interests rather than looking at the relationships they're part of and the interest of those relationships or the other person. And all of that is then encoded in us. So as you come in from that outer layer of patriarchy, it then, as you would say, it's that blueprint thing, isn't it? It's the
Yeah.
conditioning that we experience within our families. And maybe that's a good time to hand it back to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting one. I don't know. I mean, this area isn't my area of expertise, so I don't have the reading in it. So I haven't heard of who you reference or the three rings, but it's I think it's the right place to start at the edges because it shapes everything. All of that conditioning, all of that subtle and not so subtle
Mm.
shaping of who we believe we are, what we believe our roles are, what we believe our responsibilities are. That stuff is ingrained and written into our blueprints from day one. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand developmentally it may be how many months or whatever, but it's from day one, and it is in. I was thinking in the car the other day about the argument of nature versus nurture, and I'm very strongly on the line of nurture is the overriding controller of what happens in our life until we start to challenge it. And the idea of problems in relationships, I mean, it feels like you and I are going to end up talking about those close, personal, adult relationships, partners, but all relationships in life have I talk about inclusion criteria, and every single relationship, whether it's one-on-one, one on a group of friends, your relationship with an organization, whatever it might be, have these inclusion criteria, and they are explicit, implied, assumed, and problematically very often inconsistent. And when we're talking about getting to a place to have I'm going to say romantic relationship, which actually points to one of the other problems I think we have. We have these ingrained inclusion criteria based on the behaviors we've been conditioned into, that men behave in a certain way, women behave in a certain way. The value we place on contribution is set by this automation of our blueprints. And it's until we're aware of it, you can't do anything about it.
Can you give us an example of an inclusion criterion?
Yes. So I'm going to go for that kind of partner relationship. I'll use one that I have with my wife. An explicit inclusion criteria is we intentionally sat down when we got together and said we each have absolute veto on anything the other person, like if they want to knock a wall down in the house, the other person has absolute veto. Like big things that are going to impact us both. If one person really doesn't want it, then it doesn't happen. Now, that was the explicit inclusion criteria that we both bought into, that our unit will operate under that. The implied, which I've only now realized since I've been writing the book, the implied was you won't use it all the time. You won't be a dick about it. You won't just veto things because you're being a tool. That's aimed at me, not my wife. So the implied is that you will use it sparingly.
Yeah.
You will use it only when it is absolutely necessary. So for me, I've only ever used it once. We were getting ready to sell our last house to move here. And my wife said to me, I think we should change the kitchen. And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We are not spending that money just to sell the house. Perfectly functioning kitchen. But it's the only time in nearly 20 years of marriage that either of us have exercised the veto. But it's that kind of explicit rule, essentially, that we've agreed to.
Yeah.
But it has a knock-on effect to the implied. And then it's perfectly possible Louisa will make an assumption off the back of the explicit and the implied. But I don't know what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think sometimes these things are not, because they're implicit, when they're only implicit, it's almost like this is accepted practice.
Yeah.
This is what we do. Instead of sitting down and thinking, well, does it make sense to do these things this way? Or to have a conversation about because we want to do things differently.
Yeah, and it's especially with the implied and the assumed are almost like it's implied from the person who sets the rule, and then there's the assumed is the other side of it, where the other person is trying to make meaning out of what hasn't been said. But their behavior can very, very easily just be an assumption on what is necessary from their perspective to remain included. And if going back to your point about patriarchy and roles and where we see ourselves, if that person comes into the relationship, let's say if Louisa, my wife, came into that relationship having come from a background where they constantly felt unsafe, where they deferred constantly because that was what kept them safe, then her assumption of my explicit inclusion criteria could be very different from what I meant. But her
Yes, it could
behavior
be.
becomes what happens. And because I'm not aware that's what happened, you get into this pattern of behavior.
Do, and I've seen that in a couple I've worked with,
Mm,
where her previous experience lent her to behave in a particular way, which kind of suited him. He wasn't asking for it, but
yeah,
he wasn't challenging it either until she realized in therapy that this is what she was doing.
it's
And then she
huge.
started, and then the thing is that then when you actually start to say, well, I don't really know why I'm doing this and I don't want to do it anymore, then you have the problem that he's got used to it.
Yeah,
And he has to then take a step back and think, actually, that's not very fair on her. And am I willing to give up these privileges that I mean, basically, it's like who has control in the relationship, who has control. I mean, your veto is fabulous because it means that nobody has absolute control.
yeah,
But if you don't have that, then you very often end up with one person having probably absolute control, but much more power than the other person.
yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, Louise has never exercised that veto.
Right.
We have spoken
And
about it, and I'm one. I was about to say I'm 100% certain. I'm about as certain as one can be
yeah.
that the reason she hasn't is because every idea I have is amazing. Um, she hasn't because she doesn't feel the need to. She hasn't felt the need to. And the only given when I exercised that veto, she very quickly realised that it would be better to change the kitchen in the house we move into if necessary than the one we're leaving. So everything was fine. But it raises an interesting point though, because just because I've walked away from a conversation under the belief that we've come to a mutual agreement, there's no guarantee we understand it the same way. That takes a lot of, okay, talk to me about what you've understood from what I've said.
Yeah.
And that takes a level of maturity that I didn't have when we set that in place.
And the other thing I say about it is, and I have no idea how that conversation went, obviously, but
Mm,
there's a different ways of using your veto.
absolutely.
There's the very kind of and what we would say anti-relational or non-relational. It's like absolutely no way. Of course I'm going to do that. That's stupid. Or there's what makes you think that's going to be a great idea? Because I'd love to know because it's not making any sense to me, and just to be much kinder and more loving about it.
Yeah.
And and I think that's where that's kind of a different kind of implicit.
Mm,
It's that tone, isn't it? And
yeah.
that's something we learn in our family of origin. We all of those things about the the manner in which we speak and the expectations we have are set in our family of origin.
Mm,
And so like in my in my family where I grew up, my mum was a shouter and my dad was shut down. So there were a lot of arguments, but they mostly consisted of my mum shouting at my dad and my dad just kind of standing there and looking at the floor, not really engaging,
mm.
but putting up an amazing amount of passive resistance because he always got his way. And so
Right.
I learned from them. I learned both methods, and neither of them are relational.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
guess
It's interesting.
that's the inner level. That's a really kind of sort of the outer level of the patriarchal thing. This is like what happens in your family. And then within that, there's the differences. So this is going back to about the early, probably no, probably late 70s. A psychoanalyst, I think she was, came up with this theory, and it may or may not be true, but it makes sense to me, is that girls and or children are normally raised by their mothers in terms of the primary caregiver, the after a couple of weeks that goes back to work. You might get longer than that these days, but you know.
Mhm.
Um, so when they're forming a gender identity, girls have got it in front of them. There's their role model with them all the time until they go to school. Where's the boy's role model? He's out at work. He may not get in till 7 p.m. If he's lucky, he gets to spend a bit of time with his dad before he goes to bed. So his gender identity is formed in opposition to his mother. It's like a negative image of his mother.
Mm.
And that it's not like you sat down and thought, I'm a boy, so therefore I'm going to not be caring and I'm not going to be nurturing and I'm not going to want to connect with other people. It just happens by default. Now, this may actually be a load of rubbish, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And
Mm.
it explains why women are much more concerned with connection with other people and forming relationships. And whereas boys, it's like, yeah, I can stand on my own, I can be individual. And I know that's a kind of those are the opposite poles of masculine and feminine, aren't they? So
Yeah.
obviously we all can move along that.
Yeah. It's really it's so complicated. Hence the the comment at the beginning is like, this is not
Yes.
the be all and end all of all of this. But it is one of those things that from such an early age, we are exposed to so much messaging. And exactly
Mm,
as you say, on one hand, for the first however many years, there's typically a, a greater level of feminine influence on
mm,
children. And if you're female and you're getting a lot of the kind of reinforcement of who you think you're supposed to become. If you're male, there's this kind of negative space trying to find your way. And then there's all these other influences of media and social media and friends and other people's relationships and all these different things that are shaping what we expect relationships to be. And that isn't even directly taking into account we see a relationship. If we grow up in a household that has two caregivers, we see how a relationship works. And I remember growing up in with my mum and my dad and just thinking, I don't understand how this works, but this is not a model I want to replicate. They were
yeah.
married for decades and decades and decades, and in their own way, they were happy. But there was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of this that, and the other. And it was like, I don't want to model that. But all of the projections we get from other people, they just set this one of the one of the challenges I think comes from that is we have this enormous unrealistic list of expectations of this one other person in our life. And I was listening to Esther Perel. She was talking to Rich Roll, and she says, we've got this list, and I wrote it down because when you hear it out loud, it's like, oh my God. She says, okay, so what I want in my relationship are the traditional things. I want companionship, I want economic support, I want family life, and I want social status. But I also want a best friend, trusted confidant, intellectual equal, effective co parent, fitness buddy, professional coach, personal development coach. And not only that, I want a passionate lover as well,
I was just thinking, yeah.
all in one person. And it is this impossibility that not there's nothing wrong with that as a list of desires in your life, but from one person,
Mm.
it's it's just
It's
unreasonable.
it's unreasonable and totally unrealistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the image we're projected, that whole kind of there's somebody for everybody, which is a lie. There are myriad people for everybody.
Yeah.
And that one person you're with for the rest of your life, even if you met them when they were 20 or you were 20.
Or
I met
17.
Yeah, I met Louisa when I was 21. We were both 21. We got married when we were 30 and we're 50 this year. That is a very long list of things for me to be
Yeah.
for her and for her to be for me over nearly, well, 20 years of marriage,
Yeah.
especially as we've changed, both of us, massively.
Yeah. And it's interesting because apparently the divorce rate is around 50%.
Mm.
And we see that as a bad thing.
Yeah.
But actually, you know what? It doesn't have to be a bad thing, does it? I think I can remember, so I went to boarding school and we had a house mistress who was retired when I finished, I think probably at the end of my fifth form, what would be year 11. And then we got a new house mistress who was Australian. And she and her husband, their children grown up, and they decided that it just seemed like the marriage was done. There was nothing more for them to do together. And they parted amicably, and she came to live in England and became our house mistress. And I must say she was a breath of fresh air compared to the old one. But um, but I can be thinking, can you do that? That's amazing. You could actually just decide the marriage is over and You don't have to be arguing or anything. You could just decide that you want to go separate ways and have separate lives and maybe start another relationship if you wanted to. That was
So,
such a novel idea.
yeah. So what do you think the barrier to that is for most people? So they're
But
in a
the barrier
relationship
to,
to being able to sit there and have a conversation and go, do you know what? This relationship has run its course.
well, I think maybe for a lot of us, it's because we've got into some incredibly bad habits in our communication. I mean, if you've been communicating really badly for the last 10 years, it's highly unlikely you're going to manage your divorce very well.
Yeah.
And like I say, that's true of my divorce with my ex was we had been at each other's throats for such a long time that we weren't about to stop that. And I think we both tried to some extent because we knew it was going to be difficult for the children. But it's really hard to change the way you've been behaving habitually for such a long time.
Yeah.
And then I suppose if you're kind of rubbing along okay, it just isn't that great anymore. But people stay together because they can't afford to move apart.
Yeah. Which has
And there's a
increased significantly
pros,
over the last
yeah,
4 years. Divorce rates have dropped apparently over the last
yeah,
4 years,
that's right.
in part
Because
because of that.
they're now living together, but kind of separated within which I can testify is a horrible experience because I did
Yeah.
that. Um, and people who just, well, this is what it's supposed to be like, isn't it? When we're 60 now, so why would you expect it to be any different?
Mm.
He's in the greenhouse or he's in the shed or I'm out at my whatever. I'm being terribly sex stereotyping here. Um, and they just put up with it and they don't see that things could be any different. Well, I mean, I'm making this up now. This is my perception, but
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I think that's all we can share. I think there's your comment about if you've been poorly communicating for however long, at the point your relationship finally breaks down, it seems unrealistic to think you're suddenly going to go, the maturity, the awareness, the calm isn't suddenly going to arrive. And there is this, I posted earlier that, it's relationships aren't a competition or a compromise. The most effective relationships are collaborations.
yeah, they are.
And so, what is it that I think we've covered it, but just what's your take on why do they start or end up as competitions or this, even if it's a not a competition, but it's a compromise, then the only guarantee in that is there's no way that both of you can get what you want or need.
I think it's partly because we have not been taught how to do it. We had terrible role models in our parents. Do you know, I would say about my parents, which is interesting, is that they stayed together until my mum died. She died at 58, so she was quite young.
Mm.
Um, After having argued so much for so long, they still stayed together. And they seemed to have buried the hatchet after the kids had all left home. But I also knew that they always would, they'd have an argument and then suddenly they'd be all lovey-dovey again. I think, well, how the hell did that happen? Because they never showed us how they did the repair.
Ah,
And it's one thing I realized quite recently. It's like they must have done it somewhere else in private. The arguments were
mm.
in the kitchen. I have no idea what, maybe they did the repair in the bedroom. I don't know. There was a small house. There wasn't much room where you could go and hide. They certainly weren't in the garage or the garden because that was my dad's domain. Um, but yeah, they didn't show us the repair. So, and most of us have not seen the repairing process, and most people don't know how to repair,
Yeah.
or even that it's a thing. I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, you've got to make up before you go to bed, which actually isn't always going to happen.
Mm.
But then how do you make up?
It's really interesting because I don't have an answer to that. I certainly
Oh,
don't
sorry,
have an answer.
that was a rhetorical question
Yeah, but
because
it's a
people
good
don't know.
question because it's
So yeah, well, I think it kind of starts with saying I'm sorry. I overstepped the
yeah.
mark there. That was really outrageous, and I really regret it. What can I do to help you feel better? And sometimes
Yeah.
that has going to come from both parties because they both have been at it, but sometimes it's one party more than the other.
Mm. It's
And
sorry, go on.
no, say, gone, gone.
I was just going to say that there is that if your relationship has been based on implied and assumed an inconsistent inclusion criteria that you have carried through from your upbringing and your expectations of what a relationship looks like, learnt from what you saw.
Mm.
Um, I don't think it's any wonder that the divorce rate is where it is, and in fact, I'm amazed it's not higher. It's that it is the fear, and the reason I say that isn't because I'm terribly pessimistic about marriage. It's that I'm exactly what you said. We are not taught how to evolve in a relationship,
No, we're not.
and the version of me that Louisa married does not exist. I mean, the core. I'm a nice person, but my beliefs and my behaviors and my actions and the things I'm pursuing have fundamentally changed. And she didn't choose that. That was something I felt I had to do. And so I have forced change essentially upon her. And by that forced, I mean, it was something I had to pursue. And she sat there for a long time going, what is going on? Because this is difficult.
And you know what I think? When we get together so young, and you've been
Mhm.
together since you were 21, isn't it?
Well, we've known each other since 21. We've been together
Oh,
since our
okay.
mid-20s, mid-late 20s.
Okay. You can expect your partner to change.
Mm.
And the younger you get together, the more you could be expecting your partner to change.
But do we? So
But
you
do
and I
we?
can
But
look
we,
back and go,
yeah, I know.
clearly we were going to change. But when you're 25, 26, I
Mm,
didn't have that awareness. I didn't go into it. I mean, I went
mm,
into it with the whole, I don't think they say it anymore, but the line "till death us do part" in a wedding
mm.
ceremony.
Don't think they do
I
anymore, do
don't
they?
think they say it anymore. But that whole idea is like, well, actually, we don't know that to be true. There's lots of things that could happen that would cause us to separate. Um, but I still didn't have any idea how huge the change would be. But I agree that
And you,
that but opening your eyes going into a relationship, kind of going, okay, this is you now. I love this version of you, and recognizing that as if you're fortunate enough to stay together, then there will be you're almost inevitably going to have to fall back in love with the person multiple times
yeah,
over
I think that's really
however
true.
long you're together.
Yeah, and even just the fact that when you fall in love with somebody, you overlook so much and you
Mm,
focus on the things that you really like or really love.
yeah.
And we're all on our best behavior. Well, most of us
Yeah.
are anyway. It's like, okay, maybe a few people aren't, but most of us are on our best behavior at that
Yeah.
stage. And then it all starts to materialize, the kind of the bolts come out. So, and
Yeah.
then it's that, so there's this kind of stage of like we all have to go through where we start to realize that there's more to this person than we has spotted, as it were, and then
Hmm.
we don't like all of it. But I love this person enough that these things don't matter that much to me. And if they do matter enough, I can talk about it in a way that isn't kind of like putting him or her down because of their bad habits. It's like, maybe we could tackle this particular issue because it's giving me some issues,
Mm.
but in a loving way as opposed to a combative way. And I think, did you use the word combative? No, you said competitive, but there's also the
Competitive bit. Yeah.
combative element as well. And I think that
Yeah.
the language we use is so important, and yet we just don't know how to do it. We
No.
haven't been taught how to do it. And I can remember my mum, and lots of other people said this at the same time. Oh, it's really good to have an argument. It's good to have a good blowout. It clears the air. That was such a common
Yeah.
misconception in the 1970s. And I went through probably, I don't know, 30 years of my life believing that to be true, if not more.
Yeah.
And then my
What?
sister, she remarried, I've lost track of time, about 15 years ago. And when she got together with her husband, her second husband, they agreed at the outset they would not argue because they'd both experienced a lot of arguing in the past and they didn't anymore.
Yeah.
And when Mark and I got together, we did the same.
Yeah. I think I remember the extension of it's good to have an argument. Whereas people my age would say things like, "Oh, I don't trust couples that don't argue."
Oh yeah, that's
And
right.
it's
They did,
like,
didn't they?
what? Okay.
Yes.
And I'm not an argument. But the interesting thing is, Louisa and I have never had a row, and that on the surface of it is like brilliant, cool. However, underlying that could be any number of reasons why we don't row. It could be that there was a lot of rowing in my house, so I don't like it. So
Mm,
I don't, historically, I haven't ventured into those areas that I believe is going to cause a row. I just stuff it down,
yeah.
don't
So
approach
maybe
it.
that does that bring us to the subject of authenticity because we've been talking about that, haven't we?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's a if when we are afraid of what will happen if we don't not raise our voice but talk, speak aloud what we want to say, and if we don't feel able to be authentic, then we just push that down.
yeah,
But on the other side, when you suddenly start being authentic out of the blue because you've spent your entire life so far holding it down, it causes so much confusion for the other person.
yeah.
And I think that's something that has to be handled with great delicacy.
I completely agree. And I think it's that I saw something else and I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about the the mismatch in their relationship became easier to resolve once they recognized the very different backgrounds they came from. And it's not socioeconomic. It was cultural, and that one of them was the daughter of an immigrant family in the US. One of them was African American, and the way those households went about the daily business was different. So for the African American, it was the guy in the relationship. The affection in the house was rarely physical, but there was a lot of verbal affection and a lot of celebration and congratulations and all of those things. For his wife, who was the daughter of immigrants, there was none of that because the culture was we work hard as the entry level. Everybody works hard because we're trying to get ahead in this new country.
Yeah.
So effort wasn't praised, it was expected. So these two people get together in a relationship, but she had lots of physical affection from her family. And these two things are fundamentally different. That her husband was looking for praise and affection verbally to recognize his effort, which his wife didn't understand. He couldn't give her the physical because that's not how he'd been brought up. So it was suddenly this when they realized they had these two different experiences, they could then start to work with each other, collaborate with each other rather than compete
Yeah.
and compromise. It's so interesting, but having the ability to recognize, even if it sounds like we've had similar upbringings, we absolutely haven't. They've all been unique.
Yeah. And so much more so when it's cross-cultural.
Mm.
Yeah. And still, in that situation, you can still start to move towards each other. So the more physical person can give more praise, and the more
Hmm.
praising person can give more cuddles or hugs
Yeah,
or whatever it takes. And it's a learning process. And sometimes it can result in a lot of vulnerability
which is
because,
an important thing to kind of to talk about, I think,
yeah, totally.
because you were
Yeah.
saying that when we get together, we're on our best behavior, we're projecting whatever that version of man or woman
Mhm.
or person in a relationship we believe that needs to be in order to be impressive. How do you get to past the point where you're in the relationship and you're there going, I know I didn't cry on our first date, but I'm very sad and I want to cry and I don't feel that I can. So I'm just going to stuff all of that down and not deal with it. There comes a point where it is required of one of you, if you want to prolong the relationship or fix the relationship or make it better, embraces that vulnerability, with no guarantee it will be met
Yes. Do
in
you
the
know
way
what?
you
That's
need it
so
to.
important. Whenever we're trying something like this, we have to accept we might get a no or a lack of acceptance. I I think one thing this is a common problem with couples, heterosexual couples, is that he's a bit shut down and she's a bit needy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she wants reassurance. She wants emotional reassurance from him. And if she starts pushing too much, he's going to back off and shut down even more.
Yeah.
So they both have to moderate their response. So she has to actually be a little bit less emotionally out. This is very bad English, emotionally outpouring.
Yeah.
Less emotional outpouring. Just kind of moderate it a bit. Just say I'm just feeling a bit insecure at the moment and I need a cuddle, and maybe explain why, but without, loads and loads of gushy. I'm really bad. I have struggling with the language now, and he has to kind of come out just a little bit
Yeah.
to accept that she just needs reassurance, and it's because he has to drop his recourse to logic,
Yeah.
because very often it's not logical. So I had a couple I worked with, and she'd come home from work quite late, and he got a takeaway, and I can't what happened with her dinner, but she felt insecure because he'd got this takeaway. So I think she felt like there was not going to be any food for her, which wasn't the case at all. There was always food for her, but there's a part of her that believed she wouldn't get any food.
Mm.
So she just needed that, but it's an emotional thing. So she needed that emotional. So when she could say to him, I know it's not logical, I know it's not rational, but right now I feel insecure and I need a hug, he could give it. Because there was
Yeah.
no sense of like, it's all your fault because he didn't get me any takeaway or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I think that whole idea of the vulnerable step is owning how you feel and sharing how you feel.
Mhm.
And I've got one of my best friends. he's he's much better now, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, um, he was talking about he doesn't that idea of how do you feel was such a difficult question for him because he had
Mm.
suppressed all of his emotions.
Yeah,
He couldn't understand the question. He was like, I don't understand what to do with that. So in a relationship situation, he only had the logic. He'd created a life of logic.
yeah,
And so when a little further down the line, his partner's mother wasn't very well and it was looking towards end of life, he was aware enough at that point to go, I don't have the script for what comes next. Um, and I said to him, well, but you've been through it. And he said, oh, right. So what? I go and take her to play golf. And I was like, okay, no, you don't take her to play golf because she doesn't play golf. That's what you would have done. You ask her what she needs. What can you do? If you don't know the answer, don't assume you do.
yes.
And then be
And don't
pissed
try
off
to,
when it doesn't work. It's like, no, that's what you would have done.
yeah. And
It,
also
it's
not mind reading.
yeah.
We often think we know what the other person's thinking and we really don't.
It's certainly from a male perspective. It's so true for most men that it is a cliche. That our whole idea that men are solvers don't come with a need for a hug or anything like that. Bring me a problem and I'll build you a shelf type
Yeah.
thing. And it's very difficult to move outside of that. Again, and almost certainly because of
Yes.
the ties back to let's start at the outside where our conditioning
Yes,
starts. How does
absolutely.
society reward us? Rewards us
Yeah.
for solving problems. Okay, bring me a problem. Well, such and such in my department said this. Right. What you need to do is this. No, 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 no.
And the other thing I'd say to that, Wyndham, is also her responsibility to say, I just need you to listen. I
Yeah,
don't need a solution.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because if she doesn't tell him what she wants, how can she expect to get it?
yeah. It's like lead with the need and then fill in the details after. So what I need
Oh,
is for you to
I like
listen
that.
and not do anything with it.
Yeah,
I go, okay, I can do that.
yeah.
As uncomfortable as that is actually for has been for me is like
Yeah.
initially that kind of, I just need you to listen. You don't feel like you're doing anything. And as a coach, I understand that's very different. Of course, you're doing something, but to begin with, that whole idea of just being there is a difficult one. But it's fundamentally what's required very often.
It is, absolutely. And sometimes all the person needs is to feel like they've been seen and heard.
Yeah.
And there often isn't a solution.
No, certainly not a quick one.
Mm.
So what happens, this is the difficult bit, when
Mhm.
your vulnerability, when your awareness of the changes within yourself, your that dissonance of lack of authenticity starts to require you to be who you are, not who you're pretending to be,
Yeah.
isn't met with a reciprocal openness.
You just have to have some detachment from outcome.
Mm,
You have to accept that you may not get what you're looking for.
yeah.
And, you might hope that next time. Because obviously the more you say, the more you speak your truth, as long as you're doing it in a way that is loving as opposed to combative, the more likelihood there is of being heard.
Mm,
And I suppose if okay, so if you're speaking your truth and all you're getting back is a load of like, oh, that's just nonsense, or I don't know why you think that, or whatever, that needs to be dealt with.
yeah.
But if it's just because he or she is just not getting it, well, it takes a little time for most of us to start to get something new.
Yeah.
And I always come back to practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess both people are practicing there, aren't they? Both one is practicing speaking their truth, and the other one is practicing trying to understand what on earth they're talking about. And
Yeah.
actually, the other thing I would say is it's really common when someone tells us something new to try and fit it within our own framework. In fact, that's how the mind works, isn't it? You can't
Mm,
have this new thing just kind of wobbling around in space. It's going to be attached to something. So we interpret what the person's saying into our own framework.
yeah.
So then the framework has to be adjusted in order to accommodate the new information. And that takes time.
Mm,
And it may just be that the person who's encountering this new version of you is just going to take some time on their own and just kind of mull it over and start playing with it. And that might be happening in the unconscious as opposed to consciously.
yeah. Yeah. It's that whole idea of as you speak your truth, which is one of those phrases that is perfect for what it is, but for some reason jars with me slightly. But it is perfect. It describes what we benefit from doing. It's that idea of, and this is in it, I think this is true in any situation, whether it's intimate relationship, work relationship, whatever it might be. It's that you make it about yourself. It's what has my
Yes.
experience of this been?
Yes.
Because if I make it about you, one, likely to become defensive,
Hmm.
and two, you can disagree with me because
Yeah,
I think we spoke
absolutely.
about we judge other people on their impact, but ourselves on our intent. And so
Yeah.
if I make it about you, then you can go, that's not true. But if I make it about me
Yeah.
and say, when this happened, when you said X, this is how I felt, then you can't
Yeah.
reasonably, you can try and gaslight me, but that in itself
Well,
is
that's
much,
different.
but it is that whole kind of, it's much harder to deny somebody's experience if they're owning it as their experience. Go, I had no
Yeah.
idea that that's how you were taking this, not my intention at all. What can I do? How can
Exactly.
I understand what do you need from me instead?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another little link in the chain. It's like this is what you said, and this is how what I made it mean, and this is how
Mm,
I felt.
yeah, yeah.
And it's so that the what's the word, leverage
Mhm.
is in that process of getting from what you said to what I made it mean.
Yeah.
And was the language you used, did it actually convey what you really meant? Was it
Yeah.
my misunderstanding of what you meant, or was it actually because you didn't really word it very well, or you have people who say one thing with their words or something entirely different with their tone of voice and their body language.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of our language is automatic anyway. We're not very conscious of
Yeah,
the words that we're
absolutely.
using.
Just
It's a
spills right out.
yeah, and it's such a more rewarding space to be in when you're having open, honest conversations where you kind of go,
Yeah.
I'm not certain how you're going to take this. I can promise you my intention is genuine and I want to move forward and I want to resolve something or whatever it is. But I haven't mentioned it so far because I've been afraid how you'll take this. But I do need to tell you this, whatever it might be. Um,
Yeah.
and I work on the basis of having that almost rhetorical piece up front where I give Louisa a whole load of stuff around. Look, my fear is this that you'll react in a way I don't intend you to.
Mhm.
I understand this is coming out of the blue for you, whereas it's been boiling away in my head for however long it's been boiling away. So I'm not expecting a resolution. I'm not expecting you to answer me now, but can we have a conversation about X?
Yeah.
And then she's in a situation where she goes, okay, you've told me you think I might react badly, and that isn't what you intend. Okay, so if that is my reaction, then I know that's not what you meant. So I can build some space for that. Um, you've told me you want to find a way through it rather than just throw a problem at me. And you've said you're going to give me time. Cool. All right. I'm going to take some time. And where we've had challenges, that's what we've done. We've fallen into, created. I don't know how intentional it was, but that's the pattern. Is let me preempt what I fear is going to happen, and then let me tell you that's not my intention. Then let me tell you I know it's out of the blue for you, but I've been thinking about it for chuffing ages.
Mhm.
So I'm not expecting a quick solution, but I do need to share this with you.
I think that sounds brilliant.
It's been
Absolutely brilliant.
effective. Yeah, it has been effective.
Yeah. And it's very intentional. That's the thing about it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talk about in relational life therapy is first consciousness and second consciousness. So first consciousness is the things we say when we're coming from our child part, and
Mm.
particularly the adaptive child, which is the part of us that developed strategies for keeping us safe as children. And they are things like shutting down and shouting and trying to control and telling lies and stuff like that. So second consciousness is what we do, or it's the consciousness in which we behave as wise adults who want to be in relationship and don't want to hurt the other person and so on. So when you notice that you're about to say something from first consciousness, you've got a moment to pause if you can catch yourself. And this is the one little thing I was going to offer people watching
Mm.
this webinar is so I call it the ABC technique. It's called relational mindfulness. It's about being mindful of how the impact you're going to have on your relationship. And it's just ABC. A is for awareness. So you're aware that you're about to say something a bit nasty or whatever, or passive aggressive or whatever. B is to take a breath, B for breathe. So you take a breath or two, you create a pause, in which you can just kind of step back and you can actually almost kind of put that adaptive child behind you out of the way where they'll be safe, but also they won't be getting their hands on the other person. And then you choose something different.
Mm.
And it's so you and Louisa have developed an amazing way of presenting, which is you've chosen that. I mean, I don't know how you see it, I
Yeah.
don't know how you arrived there, but when you have something difficult to talk about, you're obviously able to choose that. You don't
Mm.
just sort of splice the handle and say something that you later regret
No,
because
sorry, go on.
I was going to say because you've developed it.
Yeah.
And with
I,
anything, yeah, if I say
I,
with anything new that we try, we usually mess it up the first few times. It's like, oh, I tried and I'm so sorry, I messed up, and but keep practicing until I get better at it.
yeah, and I think that the really important thing for me is to be clear about my intention. And this isn't just in relationship, this is in what I do in life generally. Why am I doing it? Why am I going to say
Mm,
that? What am I trying to create? Which feeds into your ABC model, because when we're
mm.
in that first consciousness, there's no intention there. There's
No, there is.
protection, probably, is the
Yeah,
intention.
it is. It's protection.
Um, but if we're being passive aggressive, or if we're in attack mode, or we're angry, or we're whatever, then it's like, okay, but what is my intention? Is my intention to wound this person because I feel wounded? Or is my intention, is that what I want? Or do I want to get to a point where we don't do this to each other anymore?
Yeah,
Because if that's the intention, then me being angry isn't going to help that.
yeah.
Me coming from a calmer place may help, but the reactive me isn't going to help that situation.
I say you coming from a calmer place will always help,
Yeah.
even if it's not immediately, it will help in the medium to long term.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. It really is. And
Yeah,
it's
it is.
like you say, it's almost like we're just taught some weird stuff when we're kids that you look at the
Yeah.
time you look at it and go, I don't know why you're teaching me this. But when you're older, you really look at it and go, wow, my time could have been so much more well spent learning about connection with human beings and
Yeah,
dealing
yeah, absolutely.
with what we've now kind of got into this space of like, oh, these are difficult conversations. And it's like, yeah, but why? Why do we
Mm.
think they're difficult? It's because we've made up what the answer is going to be and we don't like what that looks like. So it feels difficult having to have that conversation. Whereas if you say, this is my intention, this is what I'm trying to create,
Yeah.
the path to that is potentially a difficult conversation. That's not my intention. This is my intention, but this is what needs to be said.
And I think maybe we think they're difficult conversations because we've been told that they're difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And we often get what we expect, don't we?
Yeah. Well, we look for it
Yeah.
as well, don't we? It's like we create the
Oh,
environment
yeah. Yeah, we do.
through our expectation.
Self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah. I have a feeling we talk about this for hours and
I
hours and
know. I
hours.
was just thinking there might be some people who want to ask some
The
questions
joy of
before we sign off.
human connection. So, but yeah, I mean, if you're happy to kind of draw a line broadly, and
Yeah,
then we can see if
totally.
people have any questions. Um, if you, what I might do is pause the recording. If
Before you
people,
pause the recording, do we want to
yeah.
say a quick word about the workshop we've got
Well, I'm
on?
going to ask for questions, and then I'll come back and close, if
Okay.
that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. So I will pause, and then we will throw to the gallery for questions. So just back from our little Q&A with those who are here live. Sorrel, thank you so much. It's a fascinating conversation. Actually speaking to someone who makes this stuff their job, as well as kind of like
Yeah.
passion, is really interesting. I've learned a huge amount, and I think there's more to be shared and learned. So we are, if there's interest, we are interested in putting on a workshop to actually
Yeah.
deal with some of this in a bit more detail, to go through some of the practices that Sorrel has, that I have, that some leaders in this field espouse as well. So
Mm.
if there's interest, then we're keen to do that. We're actually looking at in about a month, aren't we? We did provisionally
Yeah, it
set a
was
date.
July. Oh, it's a Wednesday morning in July, isn't it?
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so we will start publicizing that anyway via the website. You can catch up with all the free events that we have done so far at School of Humankind on the YouTube channel, which is School of Humankind. This will be going up over the next, I don't know, 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And Sorrel and I will be working in the background to put together a workshop that is accessible, entirely non-judgmental, and with some really good practical skills that you can take away and test in your relationships and
Mm.
practice in your relationships.
You just have to be willing to make a change.
Yeah.
So
Sorrel, is there
little.
anything else you would like to add?
Um, no, I don't think so. I think we've said all the really critical stuff anyway. My feeling about it is that people often say, "Oh, no, I can't change," but that's
Mm,
so not true.
yeah.
We can all change. And actually, Wyndham, you talked a lot about how you've changed since you were in your mid-20s. So you're sort of living proof of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The version of me at 30, I don't think would recognize me now.
Mm.
I was so certain of so many things. And all the things I was certain about were contributing to my unhappiness. And
Oh, that's really interesting.
recognizing that, and then having a leap of faith that says it doesn't have to be this way,
Yeah.
but I'm going to have to be the catalyst. It's going to have to start
Mm.
with me.
It has, yeah, that's it. And it was
Yeah.
for me as well, it was like, what am I doing wrong here? How am I contributing to this? Try not to use a rude word. This mess up that was my marriage. Starts with cluster. Um, and realizing, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, I'm doing this. No wonder it didn't work.
Yeah. I think as a final point, then that's a really important point. Is this idea of ownership? It's like
Yes,
if there are two people in the relationship, there's two people contributing to whatever the situation is,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
being open enough to own your part
Yeah.
and be compassionate about that.
Yes, because you have to be compassionate with yourself,
Yeah,
otherwise change is much harder.
exactly. And as soon as I was compassionate and accepted all of my contribution to my unhappiness, it makes it a lot harder to judge other people for it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's an
absolutely.
interesting place, which we will probably cover in the workshop.
I think we
Um,
definitely will.
yeah. So on that, please make sure you're visiting the School of Humankind website, which is schoolofhumankind.com. Check out the YouTube and sign up to some more events because there are a wide range of
Yeah.
brilliant human beings at the School of Humankind sharing amazing insights on all sorts of things. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for being here, our lovely guests who joined us live. Um, Sorrel and I will see you. We'll be together talking about this in a workshop, and we will be around independently of each other as well. But
Yeah,
until
we will.
then, we wish you a pleasant and joyful evening, and we will speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.